Sacrifice of the Colossals. The Colossals would never know of Agrimar's fate. They fully expected their Titan master to return. The giants were determined to bring balance to Draenor before that happened, but the task ahead was immense. The Evergrowth had enveloped much of the world. As the wilds had flourished, so had Bhutan's strength. The monstrous spore mound now eclipsed Grond in size. It stalked through the dense jungles at the Evergrowth's heart, surrounded by hundreds of fierce Genisar. Using the knowledge shared with them by Agrimar, the Colossals debated how to defeat the spore mound. Launching an attack into the Evergrowth, where Bhutan was at its most powerful, would be suicide. The Colossals needed to draw the spore mound and its followers away from the wilds if they were to have any chance of succeeding. The Colossals gathered at the Evergrowth's border and hacked away at the forests. Just as they had hoped, the giants drew Bhutan's ire. The spore mound rallied its Genisars and stormed toward the meddlesome Colossals. As Bhutan's shadow loomed closer, the storm giants retreated into the barren ravines and the hills beyond the Evergrowth, where they could use the terrain to their advantage. Bhutan followed without hesitation, seeing the Colossals as little more than pale imitations of Grond. When the spore mound strayed beyond the Evergrowth's border, the Colossals attacked. Many of the stone giants had lain in wait amid the rocky landscape to mask their numbers. Now, they emerged from hiding, and the full might of the Colossals smashed into Bhutan and its Genisars. The war that followed would rattle Draenor for thousands of years. Control of the world constantly ebbed and flowed between the Colossals and the Evergrowth's agents. Over time, these battles took their toll on the Colossals. Many succumbed to Bhutan and the Genisar, and their broken bodies littered the ground. Just as the stone giants had risen from pieces of Grond, new creatures called the Magnaron emerged from the Colossals' remains. The Magnaron were not as large or as intelligent as the Colossals, but they commanded great power. Veins of fire and raw elemental energies coursed over their jagged skin. The Colossals called on the Magnaron to fight the Evergrowth, but they did not obey. By their nature, the Molten Giants opposed the Evergrowth, but they felt no loyalty toward their progenitors. Some of the Magnaron battled Genisar they crossed paths with, but most of the others wandered into the barren tracts of Draenor to seek out areas of volcanic activity. With their numbers dwindling, the Colossals could do little to stop Bhutan from spreading the Evergrowth. Unless the stone giants took drastic action, they were doomed to fail. Most of the Colossals gathered to make a final stand. Their hides were worn and cracked by millennia of fighting, but the Titan relics fused to their skin still contained immense power. With this power, they would sacrifice themselves to bring balance to the world. The Colossals forged into the Evergrowth and swarmed Bhutan. They dug their rocky hands into the spore mound and clung tight to its giant form. In unison, the Colossals unleashed the energy stored within their Titan relics, channeling it through themselves and into Bhutan. A massive explosion ripped through the spore mound and the Colossals. The blast was so immense that it shattered their bodies and hurled the pieces across Draenor. Bhutan's death rattle blazed through every root and leaf in the world. Lush tracts of forest withered, and hundreds of Genisar dropped dead where they stood. For one brief moment, the entirety of the Evergrowth trembled with the shared agony of Bhutan's annihilation. Then there was silence. No thoughts or emotions passed among the world's plant life. Bhutan's demise had destroyed the communal sentience that connected Draenor's wilds. The Colossals had triumphed, but they had paid a terrible price. No creatures would ever arise from their remains. Drawing on the power of their Titan relics had burned away all life essence from the Colossals and seared their corpses. Over time, their broken bodies would sink into the earth and become veins of nearly indestructible metal called black rock ore. Unlike the fallen Colossals, Bhutan's body still contained potent life energies. Wherever fragments of the spore mound fell to the earth, Forests and jungles bloomed. The bulk of Bhutan's corpse formed a vibrant region that would later be known as Farallon. Genusaur and other plant creatures would continue to thrive in these havens of life, but they would not have a spore mount to unite them in purpose and guide them their collective will. The Evergrowth was no more, but that did not mean peace for Draenor. The fate of Agramar. After leaving Draenor, Agramar discovered that the Constellar had fallen to the Burning Legion. He hunted down this vast demonic army, only to find that it was led by his beloved mentor, Sargeras. Agramar demanded an explanation from the corrupt Titan, but he received none. Sargeras would not abandon his burning crusade to extinguish all life in the cosmos. Not for Agramar, not for anyone. The mentor and his prodigy came to blows. Agramar was no match for Sargeras' fell power. He retreated from the battle and gathered the rest of the Pantheon to stop their fallen brother. Despite his earlier confrontation with Sargeras, Agramar clung to his stubborn belief that he could bring his friend back to the side of good. He tried to reason with Sargeras one last time. He tried to awaken whatever nobility still remained in his mentor's soul. In response, Sargeras annihilated Agramar. The stunned members of the Pantheon made war on Sargeras and his legion. Their apocalyptic battle warped reality and darkened the stars. In the end, Sargeras prevailed. He engulfed his skin in a storm of fell fire and shattered their physical forms. Only the Titan's disembodied spirits survived the attack. Though they escaped Sargeras' wrath, they would never be the same again. The Burning Legion was victorious. The Breakers and the Primals. For many ages after the end of the Evergrowth, the descendants of the Colossals and the Spore Mounts vied for dominance over the world. Magnaron and the Genusaur were not the sole inheritors of this conflict. New creatures of stone and root emerged to join the war. When Bhutan had exploded, its body had released countless spores teeming with the spirit of life. These spores drifted back to the world's surface and warped whatever they touched. They clung to the hides of Magnaron and weakened their bodies. Some of the Magnaron developed into half-flesh, half-stone giants called Gron. These massive predators stalked the edges of the wilds, terrorizing lesser life forms and devouring anything they could find. The Gron were only moderately intelligent, but they proved to be exceptional hunters. The jagged spikes that protruded from their skin served as weapons to kill their prey, and rocky plates functioned as armor to protect them from other dangerous creatures. Due to the lingering effects of the spores, a small number of Gron continued degenerating into one-eyed Ogron. They were more intelligent than Gron, but they were not as strong. The Ogron feared the Gron, and they viewed the hulking beasts as gods. Just as some Gron had evolved, so too would a number of Ogron. Over thousands of years, the residual spores would transform them into fleshy creatures called ogres. These brutes were smaller than their progenitors, and many of them would become slaves to the Ogron. From the ogres would arise yet another race, a people called the Orcs. They were the smallest of the Gron's line, yet what they lacked in size and strength, they made up for with a fierce intellect and a sense of community. By banding together, they survived the harsh wilds. Their first few generations of stone-born creatures, the Magnaron, the Gron, and the Ogron, were known collectively as the Breakers. They laid claim to the world's barren mountains and rocky chasms. Though the Breakers were different in many ways, they had all descended from Gron. Their common ancestry did not make them allies, but it did infuse them with the shadow of their ancient giant's influence. No matter how diverse their individual customs or ways of life were, All of the breakers were opposed to the verdant wilds. The breakers met fierce resistance from the Genusaur and other plant-based life. These creatures were known collectively as the Primals, and they traced their lineage back to the spore mounds. Like the breakers, many of the Primals arose in the aftermath of Bhutan's destruction. The numerous spores released from the giant's corpse settled in the wilds. While these spores weakened the creatures of stone, they had the opposite effect on plant life. The spores gave sentience to existing forms of plants. The jungle stirred as new beings took shape and walked the land. Some were small and simple-minded creatures called podlings and sporelings. The most intelligent and prolific new race was called the Botani. The dark-skinned Botani spread through Drainor's wilderness. Faint memories of the Evergrowth lingered in their minds, but they did not know the full truth of the spore mounds, or their battles with Grond and the Colossals. Even so, what little the Botani knew of the Evergrowth still had a profound impact on their culture. They revered the Genusaur as gods, seeing them as echoes of the great spore mounds. The Botani also rejected the idea of self, believing that their individual souls were part of a collective spirit that interlinked all plant life on Draenor. Along with the Genusaur and other plant creatures, the Botani devoted themselves to protecting the forest lands. As they did so, they inevitably clashed with the Breakers. For many long ages, sporadic battles erupted between these two factions, but neither side could ever destroy the other. Their endless conflict slowly carved out the borders of the world and brought balance to Draenor. Over time, the Breakers asserted complete control over the lands such as Gorgrond, Frostfire Ridge, Nagrand, and Arak, while the Primals cultivated the wilds of Tanan Jungle, Sangar Sea, Farallon, Shadowmoon Valley, and Talador. Remnants of the Colossals. Legends say that a small handful of Colossals survived the battle with Bhutan. They, too, were affected by the spores that spread throughout the world. As the millennia passed, their bodies diminished and became fleshy. When mortal civilizations later came to power on Draenor, these Colossals were long dead. Creatures such as the orcs would discover their bones and use them to fashion weapons, dwellings, and trinkets. They believed that the giant's remains contained power.